Ava came into my life when everything finally felt stable and under control. I met her at a tech networking event where she spilled her drink on my badge and apologized for 10 minutes straight. Her laugh was bright and disarming, the kind that made strangers around her soften without realizing it. We talked for hours that night, long after the event ended and the staff started stacking chairs around us. She told me about her marketing job and her dream of starting a small creative studio someday. I told her about coding, deadlines, and the quiet life I had built far from my family's chaos. She said I seemed grounded, calm, like someone who knew what he wanted from the world. I found myself wanting her to stay just a little longer every time we met after that night. 3 months into dating, she introduced me to her friends, and they welcomed me instantly. They said I made her glow in a way they had never seen before, and I believed them. We explored the city together, wandering bookstores, trying new restaurants, and sharing long conversations at midnight. For the first time, I felt like someone saw me without filtering me through expectations or obligation. When she suggested moving in together, I hesitated only because I had never shared my home with anyone. But the idea of waking up next to her every morning made the decision effortless and natural. We split expenses evenly, cooked dinner together, and fell into a rhythm that felt almost unreal to me. She would bring me coffee during late-night code sessions and remind me to take breaks I often forgot to take. I loved the small details, like how she hummed while brushing her hair or organized spices by color. Her presence made my apartment feel like a home, instead of just a place to sleep between work hours. She met Trevor, my closest friend, and he told me I had finally found someone who fit. He warned me not to let family interference ruin what I was building, and I promised him I wouldn't. At the time, I believed Caleb would never cross the line into my personal life again. He had always drifted from hobby to hobby, leaving a trail of abandoned projects in the basement at my parents' house. He rarely showed interest in anything that required effort or attention, so I assumed Ava would bore him instantly. I introduced them during a casual family dinner, expecting polite conversation and nothing more. Caleb asked about her job, her hobbies, and her plans, acting more focused than I had seen in years. Ava found him funny and charming in the harmless way people find stray puppies amusing. She said he reminded her of someone who just needed a little direction and encouragement to grow up. I didn't think much about it because I trusted her completely and believed she saw through his theatrics. To me, their connection felt superficial, like two people being friendly for the sake of family peace. But I underestimated Caleb's ability to perform when he wanted attention. And I underestimated how quickly Ava's compassion could be manipulated by someone who craved validation. Looking back, the shift was subtle, almost invisible until it was. It started with small things that felt harmless at first, the kind of details you shrug off without thinking. Caleb would text Ava to ask about gifts for our parents, or to confirm a recipe he suddenly wanted to try. She would show me the messages and laugh about how clueless he was with anything remotely adult. I told her Caleb had always relied on others to carry him through even the simplest decisions in life. She said he just needed guidance, and that maybe I was too hard on him because of our childhood. I let it go because I trusted her completely and assumed she would never cross any boundary with him. But gradually, the messages came more often, at hours that felt too casual for a brother-in-law dynamic. He started asking Ava about her job, her passion projects, and the ambitions she had shared only with me. She began answering him with the same warmth she used when helping overwhelmed interns at her office. Caleb asked her to meet him for lunch so he could get advice about making better life choices. Ava accepted because she believed in helping people who were trying to improve themselves. She told me about these lunches at first, describing them like charity missions with a lost soul she wanted to fix. I told her Caleb was manipulative, but she waved it off, saying he just needed encouragement and structure. She started defending him whenever I pointed out his selfish habits or lack of responsibility. Caleb became more present in our daily conversations, even though I hadn't asked for updates about him. Ava said he was smarter than people think, and just misunderstood because he grew up sick. I reminded her he had been healthy for decades, but she insisted I was holding onto outdated resentment. Soon she stopped mentioning his texts entirely, as if hiding them made the situation easier to justify. I noticed her smile at her phone more often, sometimes turning the screen away when I walked by. She would step into another room during calls and return with a flustered expression she tried to hide. Whenever I asked what was wrong, she said it was work stress or wedding pressure building up. Her affection started to shift, becoming inconsistent and unpredictable from day to day. Some mornings she was gentle and clingy. Other nights she acted like sharing a couch was a burden. Arguments began erupting out of nowhere, always about how I was focused on stability instead of fun. She accused me of planning too much, thinking too long, living too safely, and ignoring spontaneity. Whenever I asked what spontaneous meant, she would mention things Caleb said or jokes he made. She compared us without realizing how deep the comparisons cut, or how familiar the pattern felt to me. Caleb had always wanted to be the center of attention, even if it meant tearing down what others built. Ava claimed she wasn't pulling away, but she was constantly distracted, distant, and emotionally unavailable. Late nights became the worst, because she would sit on the edge of the bed staring at her phone in silence. When I asked if she was happy, she couldn't give a clear answer or even look me in the eye. Every sign pointed in one direction, but I refused to acknowledge the possibility because I loved her. I convinced myself she was overwhelmed, not unfaithful, clinging to hope instead of facing reality. But deep down, a small, relentless voice kept whispering that something had already shifted beyond repair. Valentine's Day was the moment everything finally snapped, even if I didn't see it clearly at first. I came home early carrying flowers, reservations, and a small box with the necklace she had always wanted. Ava was in the bedroom, folding clothes into a bag like she was preparing for a short evacuation. She didn't look surprised to see me, which somehow made the situation feel colder than it should have. "I need space," she said quietly, like she had rehearsed it 100 times in front of a mirror. I asked if I had done something wrong, but she kept her eyes on the half-packed suitcase on the bed. When I asked if there was someone else, she answered too quickly, like a reflex meant to shut me down. She said she needed time to think, but her voice lacked the breaking point of someone torn about leaving. She stayed with a friend that night, and every message I sent after that was met with one-word replies. The silence between us grew heavier each day, until I felt like I was texting an echo in a dark room. Trevor told me I was refusing to see the truth, that Ava had already placed her heart somewhere else. I denied it loudly, but inside I felt the slow burn of dread chewing through every excuse I made. 2 weeks later, my parents insisted we meet for a family talk, because something important had happened. I walked into their living room expecting a lecture, not the scene that waited behind the coffee table. Caleb stepped forward from the hallway, holding Ava's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Ava stood beside him with her shoulders tight, and her gaze fixed somewhere near her feet. My mother clasped her hands together, like she was witnessing a miracle instead of a betrayal. My father cleared his throat and said they wanted to tell me in a respectful way before rumors spread. Caleb looked at me with a mix of guilt and pride that made my stomach twist instantly. "We didn't plan this," he said, even though the timeline in Ava's eyes said otherwise. They admitted they had been involved for 4 months, long before she walked out with her suitcase. I realized that every lunch, every call, every message had been part of something I refused to admit. I asked why they didn't come to me sooner, but no one had an answer that didn't sound like a lie. Ava whispered that she hadn't meant to hurt me, but her voice trembled with a fear I didn't recognize. My mother insisted love was unpredictable and insisted I should try to be supportive for Caleb's sake. My father said that Ava and I weren't meant to be, as if that justified every secret they shared. Caleb added that he hoped we could all move forward as a family and not make things awkward. Every nerve in my body urged me to scream, but I refused to give them the spectacle they expected. I told them I needed air and walked out with nothing but my keys and whatever remained of my pride. The drive to Trevor's place felt endless, and by the time I arrived, the anger had hardened into clarity. He didn't offer pity because he knew pity was useless for wounds this deliberate and personal. He simply said that my family had always been a storm, and this time I had finally been struck directly. I sat there realizing that the people who should have protected me had chosen convenience over loyalty. And the woman I planned to marry had walked straight into the arms of the one person she knew would break me. My birthday arrived with an invitation that felt more like a test than a celebration. My mother had begged for a family dinner, insisting it was time to reconnect after weeks of tension. I agreed because I wanted to see how far they were willing to push the fantasy they had created. I chose an expensive steakhouse downtown and told the hostess I would be paying for the entire table. If they wanted a show, I would make sure the stage was comfortable enough for their true colors to appear. I arrived first, ordered a drink, and handed over my card so the bill would run smoothly during the night. My parents showed up smiling with the uneasy politeness people wear before discussing something unpleasant. My mother hugged me tightly, acting as if the last conversation between us hadn't ended in accusations. My father gave me the firm handshake he saved for situations where he hoped authority would soften conflict. They took their seats and made small talk about work and whether like we were asking about strangers' lives. Caleb arrived 10 minutes later with Ava beside him, but he wasn't done surprising me. Behind them walked Ava's parents and her younger sister, all dressed as if attending an engagement brunch. Caleb laughed and said he hoped I didn't mind a few extra guests because it was a special night. Ava couldn't meet my eyes, and her sister looked at her with the tight-lipped disapproval of someone forced to attend. I told them all to sit and ordered another drink, keeping my expression calm enough to unsettle Caleb. Dinner began with awkward conversation, mostly fueled by Ava's parents trying to understand the family dynamics. My mother chatted excitedly with them, as if hosting a rehearsal dinner, ignoring every boundary in sight. Caleb ordered the most expensive steak on the menu and acted like the guest of honor at my own birthday. No one said, "Happy birthday," not even in passing, an omission too loud to be accidental. The food arrived in waves, plates stacked with luxury like a feast meant for someone who hadn't paid for it. I watched everyone indulge in appetizers, desserts, and top-shelf drinks without the slightest awareness. Trevor arrived late, slid into the seat beside me, and whispered that the situation looked like a circus. I told him to let it unfold, because I wanted to see how far the performance would go before collapsing. Halfway through the meal, Caleb stood up and tapped his glass like a man preparing for a royal announcement. Ava flinched, shaking her head subtly, but Caleb ignored her and lifted the small velvet box in his hand. He declared that he and Ava were officially engaged and had chosen to share the news with family. The table erupted with cheers from her parents and forced applause from her sister, who looked mortified. My mother teared up instantly, declaring it a blessing and praising Caleb for finally settling down. My father congratulated him with a firm pat, acting like this was a triumph for the entire family. I sat quietly, sipping my drink, watching them celebrate a moment built on the ruins of my relationship. Caleb looked at me, waiting for an explosion he desperately wanted so he could play the victim. Instead, I raised my glass, smiled, and congratulated them with the calmest voice I could muster. Caleb seemed disappointed that I didn't break, though Ava looked both relieved and deeply ashamed. The rest of dinner shifted into wedding planning while I played along, offering neutral comments when needed. My parents acted as if I was supposed to help organize the celebration of my own heartbreak. Ava's father kept asking about venue recommendations, not realizing what had led to this bizarre evening. When the check finally arrived, the total was obscene, a bill fit for a small engagement banquet. I paid without hesitation, because the cost was nothing compared to the clarity I gained by observing them. Outside the restaurant, Caleb hugged me and thanked me for being so mature, a phrase sharp as glass. Ava whispered a quiet thank you too, her eyes dim with guilt she couldn't hide any longer. Trevor and I walked to the parking lot without speaking, until he finally exhaled in pure disbelief. He said the dinner was the most unhinged display of entitlement he had ever witnessed in his life. I told him it was exactly what I needed, because calm acceptance always scared my family more than anger. I drove home after the dinner with a silence so deep it felt like the whole city had stopped breathing. Trevor said he knew I was planning something, because I smiled too calmly through the entire disaster. He wasn't wrong, but even he didn't know how long the plan had been sitting quietly in the background. 3 years earlier, Caleb had begged for help buying a car he could never afford with his messy credit score. He wanted a red Mustang with custom rims and a sound system loud enough to shake windows. The bank denied him instantly, so he came to me with a story about needing a fresh start in life. My parents backed him up, insisting that co-signing was the least I could do for a brother in need. Against my better judgment, I agreed because protecting my credit seemed easier than another family war. Caleb promised he would handle the payments, but the promise evaporated 4 months after he drove it home. The bank began calling me, warning about missed payments and reminding me of my legal responsibility. I paid the overdue balance to protect my credit, expecting Caleb to take over once he got back on track. He never did, and soon I found myself quietly covering every installment without a word of gratitude. My parents assumed some mystical benefactor was helping Caleb, but no one asked the obvious question. I let them believe whatever made them feel better, because silence was easier than confrontation. After the birthday ambush, I logged into the loan account and stared at the balance still haunting my finances. Then I called the bank and told them I would no longer be making payments on the vehicle. The representative warned me that repossession was inevitable if the primary borrower failed to pay. I confirmed my decision with a calmness that felt like shedding a heavy coat I had worn for years. I updated the contact information so every warning would go directly to Caleb instead of me. For the first month, he didn't notice anything was wrong and continued driving the Mustang proudly. By the second month, he started receiving calls, which he assumed were scams because that was easier. He asked me about the messages, and I told him to block the numbers if they bothered him. A few weeks later, he realized something was actually wrong when the bank sent official notices. He called me in a panic early one morning, sounding like a child who had lost his way in a crowd. He demanded to know who had been paying the car note all this time, expecting a comforting explanation. When I told him it had been me for 3 years, the silence on the phone stretched painfully long. He begged me to continue payments until after the wedding, promising he would fix everything someday. I told him no, and the shock in his voice revealed how deeply he believed I existed to rescue him. My mother called next, furious, insisting Caleb needed the car to work, live, and stay emotionally stable. I reminded her that Caleb was nearly 30, employed part-time, and fully capable of paying his own bills. She blamed Ava's situation for my vindictive behavior and said I should rise above personal feelings. My father added that family loyalty should come before financial pride, as if betrayal meant nothing. I blocked every number and refused to explain myself further, because explanations never mattered to them. Trevor came over with beer, laughing at the chaos Caleb unleashed through his frantic messages. He said Caleb was shocked that consequences finally arrived without a protective cushion underneath him. I told Trevor I didn't feel guilty, because responsibility should not be optional at the expense of others. Every day after that, Caleb oscillated between begging, accusing, and pretending he deserved sympathy. He even showed up at my building demanding to talk, but security escorted him out when I declined. For the first time, he was experiencing life without the safety net he assumed would always be there. And for the first time, I felt absolutely no urge to soften the fall he had earned so carefully. The repossession happened on a rainy Thursday morning, when Caleb least expected it. He had been parking the Mustang in different neighborhoods to confuse the tow companies hunting for it. But desperation makes people predictable, and he eventually slipped by parking near his workplace again. A flatbed truck rolled up while he was inside, and employees watched as his prized car was lifted away. He texted me in all caps, furious and panicked, begging for help like I was still his emergency hotline. I replied with a simple message, telling him the bank would contact him about the remaining balance. He called repeatedly after that, but I blocked the number before his voice could reach me again. Ava tried messaging me through an unfamiliar account, pleading for a conversation to clear the air. I answered with 2 words, "No thanks," and blocked her as well without hesitation. My parents attempted to intervene with new numbers and long emotional voicemails, demanding reconciliation. They said I had ruined Caleb's life over a trivial breakup and should be ashamed of my pettiness. But the more they lectured, the lighter I felt, as if each accusation removed another weight from my chest. Caleb's credit plummeted instantly, and he learned quickly that banks do not forgive broken promises. His part-time job offered no stability, and the bus became his only mode of transportation. He complained loudly to anyone who would listen about how unfair the world had become overnight. Ava began driving him to work when her schedule allowed, but resentment formed between them quickly. She thought he had secret savings and financial discipline, and he thought she had family money to lean on. When both illusions crumbled, their relationship began to fracture under the pressure of shared disappointment. Ava's father found out the truth about her involvement with me and withdrew all support for their wedding. Her sister avoided family gatherings because she could not pretend everything was normal between them. Friends who once praised Caleb's charm distanced themselves, sensing the turbulence surrounding his choices. Those who knew me reached out quietly, saying they understood why I stepped away from the entire mess. The wedding planning collapsed entirely when Caleb realized he couldn't afford deposits or attire. Ava tried to salvage the situation, but every conversation turned into an argument about responsibility. Caleb blamed me for destroying his future, refusing to accept that he had been given every chance to grow. Ava blamed him for lying about finances and dragging her into chaos she never expected to face. Their engagement stalled, then froze, then silently dissolved without an announcement or apology. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Caleb had moved back into my parents' basement full-time. He stayed up late playing games again, complaining about bills he had no intention of paying. My parents continued shielding him from consequences, but even they grew exhausted by his demands. They tried one more time to guilt-trip me into helping, claiming family unity was at stake. I deleted the messages and blocked the new number before the guilt could even attempt to form. Meanwhile, my life grew quieter, calmer, cleaner than it had been in years without their noise. Trevor and I joked about throwing a celebration, the end of unnecessary obligations. We laughed because freedom tasted, better knowing how long I had mistaken duty for love. I realized I didn't miss Caleb, Ava, or the version of my parents I kept hoping would exist someday. I finally accepted that peace was not something given to me, but something I had to choose deliberately. And for the first time, I chose myself without hesitation, without permission, and without looking back. The aftermath settled slowly, like dust drifting down after a long and violent collapse. Caleb retreated into the same patterns he had lived in for years, blaming everyone but himself. Ava disappeared from my life entirely, leaving behind only the echo of choices she couldn't undo. My parents tried to rebuild bridges they had burned, but their messages felt hollow and exhausted. I chose silence, because silence was the only boundary they could not twist into obligation. In the quiet that followed, I found parts of myself I had ignored while carrying everyone else's weight. I rediscovered mornings without dread and nights, without the pressure of family expectations. My friendships grew stronger because they were built on respect instead of entitlement. Trevor reminded me that peace is not given but fought for, and I had finally earned mine. I looked back only once, not with regret, but with relief that the cycle had finally ended. Then I stepped forward into a life, no longer tied to the people who mistook my loyalty for weakness.